This is Land of Havilah, and we've come now to the book of Judges, which picks up where the book of Joshua left off. In the New Testament, Paul said that whatever was written in the Old Testament was written for our instruction and encouragement, Romans 15:4. So that's why we're reading it. It's critical instruction and encouragement. It's life or death type of stuff. It's the type of instruction that enables us to wage the warfare of life, 1 Timothy 1:18 through 20. So, therefore, we read all of it, throw in a little explanation, and we keep moving so we can cover ground. As we pick up here in Judges chapter 1, Joshua has just died. Just before he died, he did the same thing Moses did before he died. He begged and pleaded with the nation of Israel to hold fast to God's law so that they would keep God's favor and prosper rather than lose God's favor, suffer, and die. If they cling to God, he promises to keep their enemies at bay and drive their enemies out of the land little by little, Exodus 23:30. But if Israel forsakes God and begins to worship the gods of the locals, God says he's the jealous kind, Exodus 20, verse 5. He does not tolerate other gods. He'll be angry and he'll remove his protection and favor from Israel. Things will eventually get so unbelievably bad for Israel, they'll die by starvation, pestilence, and war, or be taken as slaves into foreign lands, Leviticus 26, verses 14 through 46. Joshua, when he was alive, was a very strong and gifted leader. As long as he was alive, Israel did the right thing, stuck close to God, and by God's grace they were able to bulldoze their way into the Promised Land. But right now the land is still a patchwork, with Israel's dominating in some places and their enemies are dominating in others. So here's how Israel fared after Joshua died. Judges chapter 1, verse 1. After the death of Joshua, the children of Israel asked of Yahweh, saying, "Who should go up for us first against the Canaanites to fight against them?" Comment. We're reading from the World English Bible. Most English Bibles use the word Lord in all capital letters, where this one uses the word Yahweh. Yahweh is God's name. See Genesis chapter 2 at landofhavilah.net for that explanation. Israel's asking Yahweh which tribe should attack the Canaanites. Verse 2, Yahweh said, "Judah shall go up. Behold, I have delivered the land into his hand." Comment. Israel asked Yahweh for guidance, and Yahweh answered with a guarantee. I will deliver the land into Judah's hand. So for you and me, let's seek the Lord's counsel. The Lord says, quote, "I will instruct you and teach you in the way which you shall go. I will counsel you with my eye upon you." Psalm 32:8. Verse 3, Judah said to Simeon, his brother, comment, that is, the tribe of Judah said to the tribe of Simeon, still in verse 3, "Come up with me into my lot, that we may fight against the Canaanites, and I likewise will go with you into your lot." So Simeon went with him. Comment. Before Joshua died, God instructed them to survey the land west of the Jordan River and divide it up into 9.5 parcels or lots, including the parts of the land they had not yet conquered, Joshua 14:5. So now the job of each tribe of Israel is to drive out the locals who are residing on their lots. Verse 4. Judah went up, and Yahweh delivered the Canaanites and the Perizzites into their hand. They struck 10,000 men in Bezek. They found Adoni-Bezek in Bezek. Comment. Adoni-Bezek means Lord of Bezek or King of Bezek. We don't know the exact location of Bezek other than it being somewhere in the land allotted to the tribe of Judah. Still in verse 5. And they fought against him. They struck the Canaanites and the Perizzites. But Adoni-Bezek fled. They pursued him, caught him, and cut off his thumbs and big toes. Adoni-Bezek said, 70 kings, having their thumbs and their big toes cut off, scavenged under my table. As I have done, so God has done to me. They brought him to Jerusalem, and he died there. Comment. The tribe of Judah defeated King Adoni-Bezek with the help of the tribe of Simeon. Adoni-Bezek had previously defeated 70 other kings, cut off their thumbs and big toes, and kept them around just for his amusement. Because they were missing their big toes, they had a funny walk. At least it was funny to Adoni-Bezek. And because they were missing their thumbs, they were clumsy with their hands. Adoni-Bezek starved them until they were willing to scoop up the scraps under his table with the 8 fingers they had left. He made them like dogs. This is real history, but it's also a picture of how Satan can and will dominate and reduce us. It's also a picture of how we can get the upper hand on Satan with God helping us. So what do we want to be, dogs or victors? The difference is in paying attention to everything that God has said. Now coming up, the tribe of Judah turns their attention to other enemies living within their land. Verse 8. The children of Judah fought against Jerusalem, took it, struck it with the edge of the sword, and set the city on fire. After that, the children of Judah went down to fight against the Canaanites, who lived in the hill country, and in the south, and in the lowland. Comment, now coming up, there's a retelling of events from the book of Joshua. Verse 10. Judah went against the Canaanites who lived in Hebron. The name of Hebron before was Kiriath Arba. They struck Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmi. Comment, Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmi were three tribes of giant people called Anakim who lived in the area around Hebron, Numbers 13:33. This is an example of defeating problems that are larger than we think we can handle. It's understood here that Yahweh is giving Israel supernatural victory, Exodus 34:24. Verse 11. From there he went against the inhabitants of Debir. Comment, Debir is near Hebron in the heart of Judah's land. This is the area the man Caleb spied out decades before, and Yahweh has promised through Moses that Caleb will inherit that area, Joshua 14:9. Still in verse 11. The name of Debir before that was Kiriath Sepher. Caleb said, I will give Achsah my daughter as wife to the man who strikes Kiriath Sepher and takes it. Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, took it, so he gave him Achsah his daughter as his wife. Comment, Caleb's an old hero from Numbers chapters 13 and 14. His nephew Othniel defeated the town of Debir and won Caleb's daughter. Debir is in the desert south, so coming up, the daughter has a request from her father. Verse 14. When she came, she got him to ask her father for a field. She got off her donkey, and Caleb said to her, What would you like? She said to him, Give me a blessing. Because you have set me in the land of the south, give me also springs of water. Then Caleb gave her the upper springs and the lower springs. Comment, Caleb's daughter figures that if her father gave her husband dry land, he'll be reasonable and add some land with water to it. And of course she figured rightly. Her father did indeed grant her and her husband some land with water to go along with the dry land. What father's going to refuse water to his daughter? This is a picture of God's willingness to give us anything we might need. Quote, No good thing does he withhold from those who walk uprightly, Psalm 84:11. Verse 16. The children of the Kenite, Moses' brother-in-law, went up out of the city of palm trees with the children of Judah into the wilderness of Judah, which is in the south of Arad, and they went and lived with the people. Comment, the city of palm trees is Jericho, Deuteronomy 34:3. The Kenites are a branch of Midianites who attached themselves to Israel back in the days of Moses, Numbers 10:29. In general, the Midianites are mortal enemies of Israel, Numbers 25:17, but not this little branch of Midianites. They moved from Jericho to live in the land of Judah, as it says, with the people, meaning with the people of Israel. This verse is making a point that it doesn't matter who you are or what your background, you can join yourself to the people of God. As a matter of fact, through Yahweh's inspiration, Moses earnestly pleaded with these people to join Israel. He said, quote, Come with us and we will treat you well. Don't leave us, please. If you go with us, whatever good Yahweh does to us, we will do the same to you. Numbers 10:29 through 32. So let's join ourselves to the people of God. Whatever God does for them, he'll do for us. Now coming up, some more conquests in the southern desert country, verse 17. Judah went with Simeon his brother, and they struck the Canaanites who inhabited Zephath and utterly destroyed it. The name of the city was called Hormah. Also Judah took Gaza with its border, and Ashkelon with its border, and Ekron with its border. Comment, Judah took Gaza, Ashkelon, and Ekron. During most of the Old Testament, the Philistines dominated those three places, but here for at least a brief period, Judah captured them. Verse 19. Yahweh was with Judah and drove out the inhabitants of the hill country, for he could not drive out the inhabitants of the valley because they had chariots of iron. Comment, the valley is the coastal plain of the Mediterranean Sea. Chariots aren't much good in the rough hill country, so the inhabitants of those places didn't have any, but the flatlanders do. Israel's a little intimidated by the chariots. Verse 20. They gave Hebron to Caleb, as Moses had said, and he drove out the 3 sons of Anak there. Comment, Yahweh promised the area around the town of Hebron to Caleb years ago as a reward for his faithful duties as a spy, Numbers 14:24, and Deuteronomy 1:36, and Joshua 14:9. It's been decades in coming, but Yahweh never forgets any of his promises, and he delivered on this promise to Caleb. Verse 21. The children of Benjamin didn't drive out the Jebusites who inhabited Jerusalem, but the Jebusites dwell with the children of Benjamin in Jerusalem to this day. Comment, the situation with Jerusalem is a little complicated. Some foreigners called the Jebusites live there in Jerusalem. Jerusalem's in Benjamin's territory right on the border with Judah, Joshua 15:8. Under Joshua, Israel killed a number of Jerusalem's troops, and they killed the king Adoni-Zedek that lived there, Joshua 10:23. But apparently they didn't capture the city. Just 13 verses ago in verse 8, Judah struck Jerusalem with the sword and burned it. But apparently either they still didn't capture it or they captured it and lost it again. Now we see that Benjamin isn't able to drive out the Jebusites from Jerusalem. In another 300 years or so, King David will finally take Jerusalem. Verse 22. The house of Joseph, comment, the house of Joseph is Manasseh and Ephraim. Still in verse 22. They also went up against Bethel, and Yahweh was with them. The house of Joseph sent to spy out Bethel. The name of the city before was Luz. The watchers saw a man come out of the city, and they said to him, Please show us the entrance into the city, and we will deal kindly with you. He showed them the entrance into the city, and they struck the city with the edge of the sword, but they let the man and all his family go. The man went into the land of the Hittites, built a city, and called its name Luz, which is its name to this day. Comment, within the territory of Ephraim there was an unconquered town named Luz. Israel sent some spies to watch the city and collect whatever useful information they could get. The spies didn't try to enter the city because they'd be spotted as Israelites. They saw someone leaving the city, and they took him aside and persuaded him, it says, to show them the entrance, which must be some figure of speech because anyone would be able to see the entrance or the gate of the city without it being pointed out. Apparently, this is a way of saying they got some helpful information from the man. When they attacked the city, they paid him back by letting him and all his family go. Israel renamed the city Bethel, which means house of God. Meanwhile, Yahweh blessed the man by making a new life for him and his family in the land of the Hittites, where he went and founded a city and called it Luz after the name of his former hometown. This is an example of how we should take note along the way of those people who've helped us out and not forget them. Also, the man's success as he moved along in life is a testament to the promise God made to Abraham centuries before when he said, quote, I will bless those who bless you, Genesis 12:3. So he blessed that man who helped Israel. Now coming up, there will be 9 verses with a lot of names of localities that Israel has not been able to conquer yet. Don't worry about these names. Verse 27. Manasseh didn't drive out the inhabitants of Beth-shean and its towns, nor Ta'anak and its towns, nor the inhabitants of Dor and its towns, nor the inhabitants of Ibleam and its towns, nor the inhabitants of Megiddo and its towns, but the Canaanites would dwell in that land. When Israel had grown strong, they put the Canaanites to forced labor and didn't utterly drive them out. Ephraim didn't drive out the Canaanites who lived in Gezer, but the Canaanites lived in Gezer among them. Zebulun didn't drive out the inhabitants of Kitron, nor the inhabitants of Nahalal, but the Canaanites lived among them and became subject to forced labor. Asher didn't drive out the inhabitants of Akko, nor the inhabitants of Sidon, nor of Alab, nor of Akzib, nor of Helba, nor of Aphik, nor of Rehob. But the Asherites lived among the Canaanites, the inhabitants of the land, for they didn't drive them out. Naphtali didn't drive out the inhabitants of Beth-Shemesh, nor the inhabitants of Beth-Anath, but he lived among the Canaanites, the inhabitants of the land. Nevertheless, the inhabitants of Beth-Shemesh and of Beth-Anath became subject to forced labor. The Amorites forced the children of Dan into the hill country, for they would not allow them to come down to the valley. But the Amorites would dwell in Mount Heres, and in Ajalon, and in Shaalbim. Yet the hand of the house of Joseph prevailed, so that they became subject to forced labor. The border of the Amorites was from the ascent of Akrabim from the rock and upward. Comment: as we read, we're uneasy about Israel not being able to drive out all the inhabitants. On the one hand, we're not surprised because Yahweh said from the beginning he'd drive them out slowly, little by little, Exodus 23:30. But on the other hand, it makes us nervous because Yahweh told Moses before he died, quote, "This people will rise up and play the prostitute after the strange gods of the land where they go to be among them, and will forsake me and break my covenant which I have made with them. Then my anger shall be kindled against them in that day, and I will forsake them, and I will hide my face from them, and they shall be devoured. And many evils and troubles shall come on them, so that they will say in that day, Haven't these evils come on us because our God is not among us? I will surely hide my face in that day for all the evil which they have done, in that they have turned to other gods." Deuteronomy 31:16 through 18. In other words, the people of Israel will be living among foreigners who will entice them to worship false gods. This will anger Yahweh. He'll remove his hand of protection from them, and there will be no end to the troubles that will come on them. That's the chapter. Judges chapter 2 is next, which you can find easily at landofhavilah.net. Judges 2, mark it down. Use the search box to find Judges quickly. This is the map of Judges chapter 1. These are the locations from Judges 1 that we can identify today with total accuracy or reasonable accuracy. Judah attacked and burned Jerusalem. Benjamin wasn't able to drive out the Jebusites from Jerusalem, but much later King David conquered it. Judah conquered Hebron and Debir. The Kenites moved from Jericho to the desert south country around Arad. Judah also took Gaza, Ashkelon, and Ekron, which are cities on the southern coastal plain dominated by the Philistines during most of the Old Testament. The house of Joseph took Luz and renamed it Bethel. Initially, Manasseh wasn't able to conquer Beth Shean, Ta'anak, Dor, Ibleam, or Megiddo, but eventually they put the Canaanites in those places to forced labor. Ephraim wasn't able to drive out the Canaanites in Gezer and lived among them. Zebulun didn't drive out the inhabitants of Kitron or Nahalal, but put them to forced labor. Asher didn't drive out the inhabitants of Akko, Sidon, Alab, Akzib, Aphek, or Rehob, but lived among the Canaanites there. The Amorites were too strong for Dan on the coastal plain, but in the hill country Dan put the inhabitants of Ajalon and Shaalbim to forced labor. Judges chapter 2 is next.